Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're joined with Dustin Rea, who is going to take us through matching your company's standards and processes to where your company is in its life cycle. So, Dustin, kick us off.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So we'll start at the beginning, which I think is kind of top of the funnel. And no matter where you are in the life cycle, everyone had to go through this phase. So I think there's a lot to talk about here. So obviously, the first phase is going to be the MVP phase, or minimum viable product, or more commonly nowadays, the minimum lovable product. And really, some investors will call this, 0 to 1. It's kind of another way you'll hear this stage referred to. But essentially, what you're doing in this stage is actually building your product. It doesn't just mean getting to launch, though, right? Like in my opinion, once you launch, you still have kind of like some stabilization to do. You have to actually get users on the platform, get their feedback, and start to incorporate it. If people are just instantly churning from your platform, then I would say you're still in the MVP phase. And in that phase, right, I think one of the strategies is fast iteration, right? So we've all heard of like agile methodologies, which is kind of a way to like manage a team doing that. But I think that goes for both the engineering side and the product side, because both the product team is going to be learning from the customers, from both the feedback and how they interact with it, how different KPIs are changing as they're kind of like looking into that. And then
So,
engineering side, yeah, go ahead.
what does fast iteration mean? Because Dustin and I, iterate more is always what we're saying. So, what is fast iteration? Like, what's the difference between fast iteration and just iteration?
Yeah, good call out. I would say for me, fast iteration, the distinction is there may be a little bit less intentionality in the overarching picture, right? So, for example, in a more mature company, you may be iterating towards a goal that you're kind of already aware of, but you can't hit it in one cycle, like whatever that cycle is. Maybe you've got a 6 week cycle, it's a quarter, whatever that cycle is. You're still kind of iterating towards that goal. In the MVP phases, I would say fast iteration is you're really on the edge of your seat the whole time, right? So like you're kind of learning from the customer, and that's maybe even impacting the very next sprint of work. Whereas, you're kind of iterating to even figure out where the North Star is and what do we need to do to drive value.
I strongly feel that companies should be doing this always. If you have a sprint and you get customer feedback and you don't incorporate that into your next sprint, you're just wasting, like you've just wasted all this customer feedback and all this customer time. If you then say, oh, well, we've got a plan, we've got 6 months of iteration ready and to go. And
Right. So I think there's a balance, right? I mean, I think at a certain scale, you're going to want to have more predictability and kind of more checks and balances in place than like taking a single data point of just like what the customer is saying. You may have other factors at play. There may be resourcing factors. Like when you get bigger, the teams, there's more moving parts to where you may not be incorporating it into the next sprint, but like I was mentioning, you may be incorporating it into the next cycle, right? So you may be having 6 week cycles where those kind of get locked in, because at a certain scale, it's hard to maneuver the team quickly enough to make those kinds of like dynamic changes. So I think in the early stages, that's the difference on fast iteration, is that there's probably less red tape to get through to actually make a change. So there's like kind of rapid in relativity iteration on both the product and the engineering process itself.
okay. And then how does that impact your standards? Like, do you
Yeah,
just
good.
say, hey, no test because we're small and we're
Yeah,
iterating? Or because I don't believe in that. But
yeah,
it,
absolutely. Yeah, there's different ways that you can go about it, right? I think definitely you would not want to skimp on testing. What I've seen, like in practice, what I've seen a lot of teams do is the requirements are actually kind of loose, and then that allows for a little bit of interpretation on the engineering side, for good or for bad. But that usually seems to allow the engineering team to move at the pace that the product is expecting, and then which becomes a problem at later phases in the life cycle, where people are actually using the product now, and then they depend on it, and that former process can start to bite them.
okay, so let me see if I can rephrase that in my head. So when you're an MVP, it's not that your standards are weak in terms of the code, because your code should always have good. You should all we all agree. I think that we should have good standards with code, but that it's more loosey goosey with involved with the product. Like, hey, the product has this vision, and you're like, I could do something that's not as good, but I could get it out today. That's where the standards are slipped. Like, hey, we're gonna because the expectation is we're gonna ship it today. The customer's gonna see it today. They're gonna give us feedback today or tomorrow, and I'm gonna ship something else, the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that it's not perfect before the customer sees it is okay.
Yeah, we see things like that, and I think also even not having like what you might consider like a full release at the start. So, for example, to truly get all of the value of a particular feature, you may need to be able to access that feature on like several platforms, right? Like you may need to be able to access it on the web as a manager. You may be able need to do something on a mobile application as a user. Your IT team may need to be able to do something, through your API to interact with some data or integrate with some other system. So kind of all of those different systems playing together is something I think you would see in a later stage company. And
Mm-hmm.
in the MVP phase, it's kind of like which one of those is the high value kind of target that I can
Mm.
latch onto and really deliver hard and say, okay, look, we've shown you we can deliver value in this realm. If imagine now if we were to say in our roadmap in 6 months we'll have the mobile and the API and this and that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can start to paint that picture and build hype even, I think. And I think that is important at all phases. But I think the MVP phase is especially brutal in all ways.
Okay. So that's phase one, MVP. What's phase two?
Yeah, so I think that leads us really well into the next phase, which is referred to as product user fit, or PUF, if you've seen that acronym online. But essentially, once you have your MVP out, here's how I would say that you're, searching for PUF and you've left the MVP phase. Is people are using your software, requesting new features. You're getting natural, organic signups through referrals or word of mouth in some form or fashion, and you're starting to have the type of issue where if your software were down, it would be impactful for your users. So as you start to see users be disappointed when things go wrong, that's a good indication that you're actually getting some traction. So in the PUF phase, I still think you want to have a strong kind of like fast iteration because you're trying to capture what the user wants in the software during this phase. Like how can you best serve their needs and workflows? But at the same time, there's kind of a higher minimum quality bar that's expected once
Mm.
people are actually using the software. And I think that's the kind of indication that you need changes in that second phase.
Okay. And again, I want to point out that when we say there's a higher minimum quality bar, we're not talking about the software quality. We're talking about the product quality. So, like in my head, the difference there is I could have an ugly form with things misaligned or whatnot, but everything still validates. And if you enter garbage data, it still tells you that you've entered garbage data, but maybe it doesn't look right, or maybe you need, it's got some cumbersomeness, or it's something that I would design, which is a whole bunch of rectangles on a page. Because
Good old engineering design.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Whenever I end up having to do something for like a MVP or a demo, I always make the comment, "This design shows you why I'm a back-end engineer."
Right.
Okay, so that's two. We've got MVP, product market fit. What's the third phase?
Well, yeah, product market fit is the third phase. So MVP, product user fit, where
Oh,
you're really trying to capture, yeah, it's all good, the users and their needs. And I think the distinction in the PUF phase is you're really focusing on complete workflows. So if we were very loosey goosey with requirements in the MVP phase, in the PUF phase, those requirements should start to become more concrete. Like there'll
Mm.
be certain workflows that you'll want to have all of your at least you'll want to have fully tested, right? Like that workflow can essentially not break because it's now being used in production. So that also means your change management has to be a little bit more careful. And I think even more so when you get into the PMF phase, product market fit, when you're trying to serve the needs of the customer, it's very easy to let the PUF stuff kind of slip as you start to worry more about how to make the kind of rollout of the software at scale work for the
Hmm.
customer, and then also keep your costs down at the same time while you're delivering. So I think the in the PMF phase, it's really about making sure you can have concrete requirements that are maintained and well tested. So you probably want to double down on your testing, and probably any net new stuff is going to be seen by really high value stakeholders because it's at the customer level.
Hmm.
So you'd really want to make sure that has that kind of quality level that they can instantly see that this is not just going to break down, in a few days, especially if you're a newer company.
Right. This is also where I would argue that costs of features starts becoming a thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, not that it becomes a thing, but it's a thing that you should be paying attention to. So, when you're starting to talk about implementing features at scale, you have to make sure that it's you can do it at scale, and also that you can do it for a reasonable price at scale. And that's where it starts. Those considerations start to bite into your requirements more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would see in the PMF phase too is probably where you're also starting to get some pressure from sales because probably the sales team is starting to ramp up because through if your PUF phase is going well, you're starting to have like natural word of mouth. So your GTM motion is going to naturally want to push that kind of forward as you start to gather feedback from the PMF phase and check off the boxes from customers. So I think it's also very easy to get into a kind of a organizational state of mind where stakeholders are kind of pushing for these features that are unlockers for sales deals that are expiring or maybe even commissioned at certain quarterly intervals.
Hmm.
And so you can there's a kind of a tug of war that can happen at that point. And I think if engineering and both product and engineering don't have a good agreement on how they're going to approach the organization in that way, you can get in a situation where sales is selling features you don't have yet. There may be unrealistic expectations about the features that are coming out and the timelines, and that can lead to both churn internally and through customers as well. So you'll want to have just stronger organizational processes in place to make sure that's you're not losing your best people over silly arguments and stuff.
Can you go
And
more into that actually? Because I'm thinking in between each one of these phases, if there's not any kind of communication or alignment as you're transitioning, or if it's a very subtle transition from one phase to another, I bet there could be a lot of confusion between product engineering on why the standards are the way they are and how they are shifting, especially if it's not outlined in some kind of document somewhere that we're going to be more cavalier in this process and less cavalier as we've gone
Right.
towards product market fit. So how do you deal with that incongruency?
I think it's important from a leadership perspective to really be like you want to use things like your all hands meetings, even one on ones. So like leadership will want to make sure management is aware of like how to have these conversations as well, and be like checking in with kind of all the way down the chain to make sure everybody's kind of aware of like what stage we're in, what are the objectives, and how are we getting there. That's kind of the framework that I've seen, and it's very normal for those things to change over time. But I think painting the picture of having the structure and the 5 stages that I've pointed out, even if you use different stages, I think making sure that everybody understands kind of the map of like here's where we are, here's where we're going, and here are the problems that we're facing now.
mhm.
I think that's one, and then also even like from a core values or like operating principles perspective, like how do we deal with these issues? Are we the type of company that we want to move fast and break things, and we're okay with the fallout from our customers with that? Like, so for example, these are people's businesses. So you have to think like when you make a decision, it's not just numbers in your dashboard. Like these are people's businesses that are affected, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they churn. And then that's why your referral count goes down. So you have to decide what is the type of kind of operating model that you want to use. Some people will go much more holistically to make sure that they're kind of delivering software that meets the needs and has as little kind of risk to their users as possible, even if it has a slightly higher cost to deliver for the business, because over the long run, it has a different image for the business overall, and it's a
Hmm.
different experience for the consumer. So that's kind of how I would say is every business has to approach this in their own way. I would say a lot of consumer, if you're the next Snapchat or Facebook, I would say move fast, break stuff. There's probably very little in your way of like, you're not making a massive, problem in somebody's life if your social media goes down for a second, right? Unless they live off of it, of course. But
Well, that's
for other things like medical stuff, right, you would want to be, extremely on the safe side.
Right. It goes back to your customer model. Do you have lots of
Right.
customers that bring in very little revenue and have, no impact, or do you have a few customers and they're all important?
Right.
And then medical's its own beast of you literally have people's lives in your hands.
Right. Yep. Different level of precision and tolerance,
Yeah. Okay, so that's product market fit. So that was number 3. Just recapping, we have MVP, product user fit, product market fit. What's number 4?
Yeah. Number 4. So if you hit product market fit, you should naturally start to scale, right? So you're getting kind of the signal that I've heard being used for the end of product market fit is that your sales team can't keep up with demand, essentially. So there's essentially so much inbound interest that like the sales team literally cannot process the deals quickly enough. Obviously, there could be other kind of signals, and it depends on your organizational structure, but that's a good signal that your inbound kind of motion's working that way. So at that point, when you're going into this scaling mode, you kind of enter a different set of problems that are a little bit less external and a lot more internal at that point. So what I mean by that is in the other phases, it's all about getting validation from the outside. But during the scaling phase, it's all about how do we keep this thing from falling over? Like it's an internal problem. And so your processes are going to change. What I've seen, the kind of rule of thumb is when you go from, let's say, a team of 5, 10, 12 developers, and you try to break, if you want to scale, you can't really go up to a team of 20 developers. Like it's just too much to kind of manage in the meetings. So you would want to break down into maybe a service-oriented kind of approach. Hopefully you'll start to have some kind of operating model at that point. But the idea is you can't just double the team and get double the output. You probably actually have to quadruple the team to get double your output, because there's actually a lot of new processes that need to be in place just to keep up with the scale itself, not of just the team, but of the software. So you're going to need, just more people working on it, and they'll need to coordinate, which just takes drag on the organization. But if you don't do that, you kind of end up paying more for getting exactly what you're getting today, which is just purely a waste.
Right. This is the domain that I play in. And I can tell you the thing to really consider when you're hitting this area is the decisions that you've made in the past were right, but they're not right anymore because now scaling is the issue. And so you now need the same features, but you need to figure out how to do them at scale. And it's not, as you say, you can't just double the hardware or double the number of software people. You need to transform. The customers want the same thing, but you need to transform everything inside, to be software about it. The customers love the interface and they love what you're presenting, and everything inside the box has got to change.
Right. Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
There's an interesting thought here. This reminds me of a previous conversation, Jeffrey, you and I have had about. There was a place I worked for where some people were complaining about like upgrading different packages or being ahead of security issues. And we were intentionally kind of kicking the can down the road on those things. And so there was misalignment there, and engineers were a bit confused on why are we not trying to be proactive about some of these things. So I had talked to the CTO at the time about it and asked, well, why are we not prioritizing this? Because it is important when it comes to security and that kind of stuff. And he said, well, right now we're a sinking ship. We're not profitable. We don't have market fit. And those concerns are valid, but it's also valid for us just to keep trying to make money and pay our developers. If we spend all of our resources just on securing a system that nobody uses, we're just going to run out of money. And I was like, that's an interesting point, because as an engineer, it's important to me to be secure always. Mm-hmm. As a CTO, he wants to be secure enough to be compliant with what he has to legally be compliant on. And there is, at some point, there's going to be a phase, that kind of what you're talking about here, where we're profitable, right? And as soon as you're profitable and you're trying to protect the machine that's making you money, that's a phase shift, right? And so that phase shift, engineers might go, well, why are we suddenly prioritizing security? All these years you were kicking the can down the road. Well, now that's the phase shift. Now you've got some kind of fit and you want to protect the thing that's making the money. Mm-hmm. So then you document or let everybody know, okay, now we're in this phase. We got to get more security. We have more eyes on us. More people are trying to hack us now. And there's a very clear phase shift in which you need to change how you're acting in the processes around your company. And that kind of aligns with what Dustin's outlining out here.
Yeah, it's a good call out with security. When you're very, very small, no one notices you and you can fly under the radar. And as you get that scale up, you're just going to you organically attract customers. You're going to organically attract hackers who are going to,
Yep.
If anything you do can send email, you are going to become a target as soon as they become aware of you. And SMS doubly so. Like anything you can do,
Even file uploads.
even file uploads, right?
Yeah, and before we move on, I think I have a good expression that I use, especially for new leaders that are, like if you're a new manager managing engineers and you have to kind of have this conversation with that engineer, one thing that I've used several times with success is kind of mentioning that sometimes the best technical decision is not the best business decision. And I think that's really, really, really hard for engineers. I know it was hard for me, like at first, kind of like getting through that. And just to Isaac's point, is like just trying to understand why. Like I think if engineers can approach this kind of like frustration with a little empathy of kind of like what's going on behind the scenes, and then even apply their engineering mindset to that problem, it now becomes like, meta engineering of like, I understand why we must kind of deal with this part of the problem first before we can worry about this part of the problem. So I think that's some good framing for managing this situation.
Yeah, it's a great call out. Okay, so we had MVP, product user fit, product market fit, scale up, and what's the final phase?
Final phase, where you've reached kind of the ultimate domain, I would call as the multi-product platform phase. Sometimes you'll see companies have multiple products early on before they've even hit PMF. That does not mean that they are past the other phases. It just simply means one of the ways that they're approaching the PMF problem is they may be just breaking down, different what we would call services into different brands, and it still is a multi-product platform, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have PMF. So multi-product platform is a little bit of a weirder one, but in my experience, it comes with its own set of problems, regardless of kind of where you're at in the phase. And if you're past the scale phase, it has even more of its own kind of issues. But yeah, I think at the multi-product platform phase, you're looking at things like organizational efficiency, recruiting, and probably a lot of like risk mitigation. So like, security, making sure you have like your authentication, your security protocols, developer experience. On the front end side, you would have your design system and developer tooling kind of already done at this point. And you're utilizing the product building machine that you've built in stages 1 through 4 to essentially churn out additional products with an efficiency of scale at that point, or an economy of scale, I mean to say.
Yeah. It's like once you can roll out one product, you can roll out more products pretty easily because it's all set up.
Right, and you have the audience. That's the other thing. So if you, at that point, once you've hit the scale, you have the audience. The audience has other problems that you are now equipped to solve, right? So I think that's the kind of the signal that you're ready to approach that.
That's a good call out. Awesome. Well, that was 5 phases in how your organization needs to shift. Change how you run your organization, the standards you live by needs to shift over time. But of course, the coding should always be extremely high quality. Awesome. Well, thank you for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
Dustin
Rea.
and I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.